interrupt this broadcast to bring you some breaking news.
Good morning. We are reporting live from outside the Topo Chico prison in Monterrey, Nuevo León, one day after the deadliest prison massacre in recent Mexican history. The sheer scope of the violence here is staggering. Official reports confirm 49 inmates were killed and 12 other injured in the overnight rioting. News correspondent Rob has more information.
As you previously mentioned, Isabel, the situation inside the facility is now under control, thanks to the deployment of the Army, Navy, and federal police agents who are supporting surveillance duties. While the ultimate failure of institutional control is tragically clear, initial investigations are focusing on one confirmed cause, a brutal power struggle between two high-ranking criminal figures. Authorities are currently gathering evidence and testimony, trying to identify and prosecute all individuals involved in the killings. The focus now shifts to the men at the center of this blood feud. Jorge Iván Hernández Cantú, known as El Credo, and Juan Pedro Saldivar Farias, alias the Z-27. El Credo, who allegedly held control over the penitentiary prior to the attack, was detained in November 2012. He led a criminal cell implicated in at least 48 homicides. Although many news reports initially linked him to the Gulf Cartel, it is now stated that both he and his rival actually belonged to the same cartel, Los Zetas. The Z-27, who is believed to have organized the attack with the goal of seizing control, is a notorious regional chief of Los Zetas. He was incarcerated after his detention in late 2013. His criminal history includes being implicated in the 2010 murder of a U.S. citizen, David Hartley, and the subsequent 2011 attack on U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents, ICE. What is confirmed by authorities is that a dispute between these two highly dangerous figures caused the explosion of violence. The massive investigation is now underway to determine precisely who else participated in the mass murder that claimed 49 lives. As soon as more information is obtained, we will be the first to inform. Streaming live directly from Topo Chico prison in Monterrey for Inside the Walls. Right back to you, Isabel.
Tragedy reflects the dire and long-standing situation of self-governance by criminals within our penitentiary system. Reporting from Monterrey, this is Isabel Juarez for Inside the Walls, live on the scene.
To first understand the main cause of these horrible deaths, we need to understand who Credo is, who Credo was, and what Credo did long before the events of that night. News outlets erroneously reported on the day of his capture that he was a member of the Gulf Cartel. This false narrative was later weaponized by his enemies, who used the accusation of betrayal against the Zetas to turn other inmates against him. That lie became the spark, an engineered tension that helped set the stage for the riot, in which 49 men lost their lives in less than 2 hours. Some were beaten, others stabbed, hanged, or burned. Several more died from smoke inhalation after being intentionally trapped with no way out. All of it carried out with a cold, organized precision that revealed the level of control held by a single man. But this chapter of terror did not end because authorities regained control. It ended because another figure, far more brutal in reputation and ambition, rose to challenge him. Juan Pedro Saldivar Farias, known as LZ-27, is the man who ultimately dismantled Credo's empire of fear, replacing it with an even harsher reign of his own. Yet, to understand how Z-27 overtook him, we must first understand who Credo was, how he operated, and how his rise to power inside the prison became possible in the first place. Jorge Iván Hernández Cantú, alias El Credo, or Comandante Credo, was detained in November 2012 in Monterrey, capital of Nuevo León. His arrest was carried out by the Grupo Antisecuestros, an elite anti-kidnapping unit. He was apprehended on charges including kidnapping, drug trafficking, and murder. The criminal group he led confessed to at least 48 killings, linked directly to his operations. Credo and his sicarios controlled vast areas of the Monterrey metropolitan zone. Monterrey, Guadalupe, San Nicolas, Apodaca, Juarez, and Santiago. His downfall came as part of a larger operation that captured 24 members of his organization, all loyal to the Zetas. Comandante Credo's rise inside Topo Chico was immediate, calculated, and violent. From the moment he stepped through the gates in 2012, accompanied by 24 hardened sicarios who answered exclusively to him, the balance of power inside the penitentiary shifted overnight. In a facility where authority belonged only to those capable of enforcing it, Credo wasted no time establishing dominance. His strategy was blunt and effective. Ruthless beatings, targeted killings, and the systematic humiliation of anyone who posed a challenge. The message spread quickly. Resistance meant death. Submission meant survival. Within weeks, the men who had previously controlled the prison found themselves subdued, displaced, or eliminated entirely. Yet Credo understood that power inside Topo Chico also flowed through the prison's administrative structure. And because patience had never been his virtue, he chose a path of influence rather than open confrontation. According to persistent rumors, never formally proven but widely believed, Credo paid substantial sums to corrupt prison officials to orchestrate the transfer of the existing Zeta commander and his loyalists to the Apodaca penitentiary. Removing them cleared the final obstacle to his ascent without directly challenging the cartel hierarchy on the outside. The maneuver was risky. Whispers circulated that he had engineered the transfer behind the backs of higher-ranking Zeta leaders, placing him on uncertain ground and under quiet scrutiny. But in the absence of concrete evidence, the organization ultimately shielded him. And with that protection came something far more dangerous: impunity. Anyone inside the system, guards, administrators, even external authorities, who attempted to discipline or relocate Credo soon found themselves targeted by Zeta enforcers on the outside. Threats escalated into assassinations. The cost of challenging him became so steep that few dared to try. Within months, Credo transformed from a newly arrived inmate into the unchallenged sovereign of Topo Chico. His name carried a weight that eclipsed the institution's own authority. To cross him was to accept a death sentence. Under his rule, the prison became a kingdom, one governed by fear, violence, and absolute control. The terror Credo imposed was not confined to inmates alone. His brutality extended far beyond the cell blocks and seeped into every corner of the institution. To rule Topo Chico, he understood he needed absolute obedience, not just from prisoners, but from the very people sworn to keep order. And so he broke them. Prison guards who resisted his authority were abducted outside the walls, tortured, executed, and in several cases dismembered. Their remains were left scattered near the penitentiary's entrance, grisly warnings displayed with surgical precision. Each body part spoke the same message. Credo, not the state, governed Topo Chico now. Families of staff members were also targeted. Kidnappings, threats, and violent reprisals became common tools of coercion. Terrified for their lives, guards who survived these ordeals pledged unconditional loyalty. Those who did not comply simply disappeared. In a matter of months, Credo had bent an entire institution to his will. The prison's official hierarchy became nothing more than a facade, a hollow shell overshadowed by a single man whose authority no one dared question. Under his dominion, Topo Chico evolved into one of the most feared and lawless penitentiaries in Mexico, a dark kingdom governed by terror and ruled unequivocally by Comandante Credo. By 2015, the Zeta cartel ran Topo Chico completely, a system known as autogobierno, where the Zeta cartel controlled everything within the prison system. The dominant leader was indeed Comandante Credo, with the backing on the outside of the most violent drug cartel the world has ever known, Los Zetas. Credo's control was total, transforming the prison into a lucrative criminal enterprise where the mere act of survival was subject to a massive systemic tax. This system of extortion and abuse, lubricated by rampant administrative complicity, touched every corner of Topo Chico, extracting succulent amounts of money from inmates and their desperate families. The seat of Credo's power was Building C, or C2, where he resided in a private fortress of astonishing privilege. This wasn't a punishment cell. It was a compound of opulent comfort. His private quarters were a display of opulence. At the center stood a king-sized bed with a 50-inch screen with cable television access, surrounded by a massive neon-lit aquarium teeming with exotic fish that added movement and color to the room. The adjoining bathroom featured both a sauna and a rain shower, amenities more fitting for a luxury resort than a prison. A separate living area and a fully furnished kitchen, crafted from rich mahogany wood, completed the suite. Every detail, from the polished finishes to the high-end decor, mirrored the comfort and exclusivity of a five-star hotel. These privileges were sustained by a deeply entrenched network of corruption, a triumvirate of power that reached the highest levels of the prison's administration. At its center stood Warden Gregoria Salazar Robles and her closest subordinates, who not only turned a blind eye, but granted Credo explicit authorization to conduct his operations within the prison walls. The depth of this complicity warrants its own extensive exploration, a story that unfolds over several chapters and exposes just how far the administration had fallen into Credo's criminal enterprise. The revelations are staggering. Officials who facilitated murders, authorized covert movements, and even allowed select inmates to leave the facility under cover of night to carry out executions on the streets of Monterey, returning by dawn as if nothing had happened. Events will later reenact in future episodes. The vast majority of the population lived in abject conditions, suffering from severe overcrowding, insalubrity, and the presence of pests. This forced desperation allowed Credo's Zeta faction to impose a tariff on nearly every basic need and desire. The cartel commanded the prison's very infrastructure, literally deciding where an inmate could sleep. Cells meant for a few people housed double or triple their capacity, but Credo's organization sold living spaces to those who could afford it. For those who could not pay the demanded ransom or were resisting charges, they were denied a proper bed and were forced to be confined beneath steel bed frames bolted to the floor and/or endured beatings until they indeed did pay what was demanded of them. New arrivals faced immediate extortion, known as cobro de piso, protection fee. They were levied a fine of approximately $5,000 to $10,000 US per person to be released into the general inmate population, free from the threat of beatings. For those whose families resisted or ran out of money, the retribution was swift, violent, and highly effective as a psychological weapon. Inmates who had not paid were subjected to daily beatings and torment. During nightly rounds, victims were often forced to undress and have their hands secured high to cell bars before being struck repeatedly on their naked buttocks with a 2x4 piece of wood, sometimes specifically prepared with drilled holes to maximize pain. Within the inner hierarchy of Topo Chico, enforcers under Comandante Credo's command served as the brutal instruments of control. Their methods were ruthless. During interrogation and extortion sessions, they often recorded the torture of prisoners, sending the footage directly to the victims' families as proof of what would happen if payments stopped. Even families who had already fallen into bankruptcy were forced to continue paying, driven by fear and despair. Violence was the primary language of Credo's regime. Beatings, torture, and psychological terror were not acts of chaos, but calculated tools to maintain absolute submission inside the prison. Among Trailer's most feared enforcers were men known only by their nicknames: Cejas, Parejon, Bender, Pitufo, and others, each infamous for carrying out punishments and executions on Credo's behalf. Their base of operations was in Building B1, the same cell block where Comandante Trailer himself resided. His cell, located at the end of the corridor, was a stark symbol of the power imbalance within Topo Chico. Outfitted with luxuries that mirrored Credo's own quarters, it stood in shocking contrast to the misery surrounding it. A private suite within what had become one of the most violent prisons in Mexico's history. The cartel's control extended beyond violence. It governed survival itself. Every necessity within the prison walls, from water to food, flowed through their hands. Even the most basic rights came at a price. Inmates who could afford to pay received 3 full meals a day, while those who could not were left with a single ration, usually a thin vegetable soup, stripped of the meat it was meant to contain. The missing portions never went to waste. They were set aside to feed the cartel's own members, ensuring that their appetites, unlike those of the rest, were fully satisfied. Furthermore, there were dozens of illegal internal stores, or fayucas, that sold products at exorbitant prices, all on the cartel's behalf. Credo's faction maintained a firm grip over the prison's drug trade, controlling the distribution of all illicit substances within its walls. Among their most profitable ventures was the sale of a crude homemade liquor known as agua de papa, a harsh concoction brewed from boiled potatoes, rice, and yeast. Packaged in recycled Coca-Cola bottles, each sold for roughly 150 pesos, about $8 at the time. The operation was massive. An estimated 5,000 bottles circulated through the prison each week, consumed not only by the general inmate population, but also by members of the Zeta cartel themselves. The results were often disastrous. Poorly prepared batches frequently led to poisoning, and in several instances, the tainted drink claimed the lives of those who consumed too much of it in search of escape from their grim reality. Under the system of autogobierno, the cartel's reach went even further, shaping every aspect of daily life and extending its cruelty to the most vulnerable. Female inmates, particularly those newly arrived, were often coerced into exploitation as payment for the extortion imposed on them. This occurred with the quiet consent of certain prison officials, who allowed the transfers from the women's unit to the men's and ignored the suffering that followed. What happened inside Topo Chico was more than corruption. It was the complete surrender of state authority to criminal power. For many inside, survival depended not on law or justice, but on allegiance, payment, and silence. And for those who lived it, the memory remains a haunting reminder of what happens when control of a prison, and the lives within it, falls entirely into the hands of those it was meant to contain. Even interactions with the outside world were controlled and taxed. Credo had the exclusive right to receive visitation, conjugal rights, and make phone calls.
I'll sign for it.
Other inmates needed a permission slip with a seal that came with a heavy fixed price from the auto control, Credo's government, to access the intimate visit area.